Abilities like Resolute counterflow, seeing through enemies, and Evanescence are some of the most confusing and misunderstood mechanics in Black Myth Wukong. So here's how they actually work. Seeing through enemies is a mechanic that comes into play with the varied combos for Smash Stance and Thrust Stance, which are Resolute Strike, which you unlock with the Resolute counterflow skill, and Tactical Retreat, which you get with offense in defense. To do these varied combos, you just need to hit the heavy attack button right after a light attack. For Resolute Strike, you also need to have at least one focus charge on hand to power it. For Tactical Retreat, you don't need any. Don't worry, we'll talk more about focus in a minute, but just executing one of these varied combos isn't enough to trigger the see-through. For that, you have to hit the heavy attack button just as an enemy is about to hit you. You know you'll nail it when you see a red flash. Seeing through an enemy grants a moment of invincibility and enhances the attack quite a bit. With Resolute Strike, enemies also become easier to stagger. So trying to work in the see-through mechanic is definitely worth it, but it's also hard to pull off. The best thing to do is simply use your light attacks like you normally would, and then be ready to hit the heavy attack button as if it was your dodge button and you're trying to nail a perfect dodge. Again, the timing is pretty tight. Hitting heavy attack when the enemy's attack animation starts is too soon. You have to wait until they're actually about to hit you. But it's important to understand you can also do a varied combo without seeing through the enemy. In fact, that's probably what's going to happen most of the time, and they're still worth doing even if you miss the see-through, especially if you unlock some of their upgrade abilities. Like with Resolute Strike, unlocking the next skill down adds Skyfall Strike to the combo. So now, if you have another focus charge ready to go, you can just hit heavy attack a second time right after Resolute Strike to do the Skyfall Strike for an even stronger attack. And that Skyfall Strike hit will pretty much always stagger even the toughest bosses, whether you've got the see-through or not. With Tactical Retreat, if you've got a focus charge, you can hit heavy attack a second time to trigger Forceful Thrust, which deals a solid amount of damage and a lot of stagger. But as you can see, focus charges are key if you want to use these stronger attacks. Focus charges are these glowing dots down here on the edge of the focus gauge, and focus is arguably the most important combat mechanic in the entire game. Early on, it might not seem super important, but it fuels all the most powerful staff attacks, and you're really going to need those as you get further along. So you can build up focus in two different ways. The first way is primarily achieved by hitting enemies with light attacks, but also by doing a few other actions like pulling off perfect dodges, which are when you get the ghost image left behind after dodging at the last second. These actions build up the focus meter on the left side of the gauge, and once it fills up all the way, you get one of those charges. Now, you start the game with just one charge slot, but you'll want to unlock more pretty quickly by investing points in skills on the stances page. As you invest points anywhere on this page, the focused attack skills along the left side will unlock, giving you additional focus charge slots. Although the last one works a little differently, so we'll come back to that in a second. But the main thing is just getting at least focused attack 2 and 3 unlocked. So once you have focus charges built up, there's a few different things you can do with them. The simplest thing is just tapping the heavy attack button to unleash a stronger attack. In fact, that's pretty much the only time you should be hitting the heavy attack button, when you have some focus charges built up. Heavy attacks are pretty weak without any focus fueling them, so generally, if I'm going to hit heavy attack, I like to wait until I have at least 2 focus charges built up. Not only does this deal more damage than just one charge, but it also almost always staggers the enemy, whereas a single charge heavy attack typically won't. So my typical combat loop is doing light attacks until I build up at least 2 focus charges, and then using them either for a charged heavy attack or to fuel one of the varied combos like Resolute Strike. But if you don't want to wait to build up focus from light attacks and perfect dodges, you can also hold down the heavy attack button to manually charge at any time, and then release once you have some charges. Charging focus manually like this will give you the same heavy attacks as if you had built it up from light attacks. But there are a few major trade-offs. The biggest one is that you have to use all the focus immediately. Your focus will only last until you release the heavy attack button, and you'll use all of it up when when you release. That's different from focus built up the first way through light attacks and other actions. When you do that, the focus is sticky. It stays around until you decide to use it. Manually charged focus is very much use it or lose it. If you dodge or get hit while charging, you'll lose all of it, including any focus you already had built up the normal way. So you should really only manually charge focus when you're confident you're safe to do so. Another trade-off is that you'll be stuck in place while charging with the pillar and thrust stances. That only makes it more likely you're going to need to dodge and lose all the charge, or in the case of pillar, you might run out of stamina, which forces you to unleash the attack earlier than you wanted to. So the takeaway is don't get greedy with manually charging. However, once you unlock the Force Unbound skill, the Smash stance does allow you to move around while manually charging, which is why Smash is probably my most used stance. Anytime there's a break in combat, with Smash stance, you can start holding down heavy attack to begin charging focus, and then sprint to stay mobile. You should also know that Smash stance can deal the most damage in a single hit compared to the other two. So think of Smash stance as your primary damage dealer. One build to keep in your back pocket, especially for boss fights, is to equip the full Pilgrim's armor set to get the level 4 perk, which increases your attack damage every second you're sprinting, maxing out at 10 seconds. So as you head into a boss fight, you can hold down heavy attack to manually charge your focus all the way up to level 3 while sprinting to stack the charged smash attack with the extra damage from the armor perk for a powerful opening hit. Of course, you can use that in the middle of combat too. For example, after immobilizing, you can start charging and just run in a circle to stay near the enemy. You might not have time to get a full 3 charges, but you can still deal some solid damage very easily. But Smash Stance isn't the only one I use regularly. I do also use the Thrust Stance a lot. Manually charging it is a great way to break enemy shields, and it also tracks enemies higher up than you'd think, so you can use it to hit flying enemies or just enemies that are perched up high. But what I really like about Thrust Stance are the Tactical Retreat and Forceful Thrust abilities. You can do Tactical Retreat without any focus charges built up, and Forceful Thrust just costs 1. So that means you can retreat to safety and jab the enemy for a solid amount of damage for just 1 focus point. And with the Whirling Thrust skill, you can build that 1 focus point back up pretty quickly. And by the way, I find it works better to tap light attack repeatedly to get Whirling Thrusts to work, not hold it like the description says. So in terms of focus, all the Thrust Stance combo skills are less expensive to use compared to the Resolute counterflow set. Although you can chain Resolute strikes and Skyfall strikes once you unlock Invigoration. If you can get a see-through, then Invigoration will allow your Resolute strike to give you back a full focus charge. So you basically get to do it for free, which makes sustaining focus and starting up another Resolute strike and Skyfall strike much easier. Now, we haven't talked much about Pillar Stance because frankly, I think it's the least useful one. Unleashing a fully charged Pillar heavy attack does deal a lot of stagger and a solid amount of damage, and using Sweeping Gale can be useful in situations where you're surrounded by many weak enemies, but it's just much more situational than the other stances, so I don't find myself using it much. The one situation where I think Pillar Stance excels is when you have a lot of stuff going on the ground. So either a lot of small enemies swarming you, or maybe a lot of ground level attacks coming from a boss. In that case, it's great to hoist yourself out of harm's way, but even then you have to be really mindful of your stamina. While you're perched in the air, you'll quickly lose stamina if the bottom of the staff gets hit. So if you've got focus built up, a quick Pillar Stance heavy attack is pretty effective. But manually charging one is often difficult until you can upgrade your stamina quite a bit. And I really don't recommend upgrading your stamina very much, or really at all, until you're very late in the game. It's just more effective to dump your upgrades into health and mana instead. But let's back up for a second and make sure we understand some nuances with a few basic mechanics. We've been talking about those focus charges a lot, and you may have noticed that the final focused attack upgrade seems to indicate you're going to get a 4th focus charge slot, but a 4th one never shows up. Instead, the 4th slot is actually the entire gauge. If you already have 3 charges built up and you manage to charge up the meter again, the whole gauge will glow gold and you can unleash a super powerful attack. But you only have 10 seconds to do it. After 10 seconds, the gauge will lose its glow and you'll see the focus meter losing charge back down to the 3rd level. Now, it's tempting to go for that overcharged gauge as often as you can, but it's generally not worth taking the time to build it up that far. Yes, it is a powerful blow, and you should know that you can actually interrupt most of even the most powerful boss attacks with it. But if you're always trying to get a level 4 charge, you're missing out on multiple opportunities to use the varied combos we discussed earlier. Or or even just unleashing a few lower power heavy attacks, which together would deal more damage than a single fully charged one. So I generally only go for the level 4 attack when I happen to get the 4th level without trying for it. Now, there are a couple of useful things to know about the basic light attack combo as well. It's important to understand that the full light attack combo is composed of 5 moves, with the strongest hit coming from the 5th and final move. But remember that attacks use stamina. You can still attack without stamina, but your hits will deal much less damage and you won't be able to pull off that powerful 5th move. So you don't really want to attack without stamina. You might have also noticed that enemies will often retaliate in the middle of your light attack combo. Typically, they do this around the 3rd move. So you want to try to avoid button mashing the light attack and instead do very intentional presses so you're ready to dodge cancel out of the combo at any moment. You don't want to go for those 4th and 5th moves unless you know for sure you're going to be able to land them. I've also noticed that the first 3 hits of the light attack combo seem to deal more stagger, or at least tend to interrupt enemies more than the 4th move does. The 5th will definitely interrupt them if you can get there, but that 4th move where you do a bunch of low damage hits really fast is pretty much the window where you're most vulnerable. So to time your button presses with the light attack, it helps to practice doing it slowly outside of combat a few times. Try to see how slowly you can do it, and notice how each individual move ends with the staff swinging backwards towards the screen. That's your cue for when to hit the button to start the next move. Now, you'll also want to prioritize unlocking the composure skill, which lets you continue the light attack combo after a dodge. Once you have this, what you want to aim to master with the light attack is hitting an enemy with the first 3 moves, dodging when they retaliate, and then continuing the combo for the 4th and 5th hits right afterwards. This lets you balance building up lots of focus with the combo, avoiding damage, and getting that powerful 5th hit more often. Another good trick you should use with the light attack is doing a jump attack. If you jump and then immediately hit light attack, you'll jump off the enemy and bounce back to a relatively safe distance. This can be really useful when trying to learn the attack patterns of a new enemy because you can deal a bit of damage, build up a decent amount of focus, and stay relatively safe. If you want to deal more damage, you can hit the heavy attack button immediately after hitting light attack to slam down. That's one of the only situations where using a heavy attack without any focus is actually useful. Alright, let's clear up this Evanescence thing. Evanescence is a skill in the upgrade tree for your Immobilize spell, and it both extends the length of the immobilization and boosts the damage you can deal to the immobilized enemy. But to trigger it, just like the see-through mechanic, you have to use Immobilize right before an enemy is about to hit you. You'll know you nailed Evanescence when the Destined one does a little jump where he leaves a ghost image behind, similar to getting a perfect dodge. The extra immobilization time and damage from Evanescence is really nice when you get it, but it's difficult to do consistently. Unfortunately, at least on the current patch, if you're just a little too late, you'll both take damage and completely lose your Immobilize charge, which is really annoying. So if you're going to try to leverage Evanescence, I recommend erring on the side of hitting Immobilize too early. That way you just risk getting a regular Immobilize instead of losing all your Immobilize charge and taking damage. You've probably been using Immobilize quite a bit, but you'll want to make sure you know how to leverage the other spells as well. Immobilize is one of the 3 Mysticism spells. In the spell selector, you have Mysticisms, Alterations, Transformations, and Strand abilities. For Mysticisms, in addition to Immobilize, you'll also unlock Ring of Fire once you get to Chapter 3. Don't worry, you can't miss it. You can miss Spellbinder though. To get it, you need to do the Treasure Hunter's quest in Chapter 3, which I'll link a guide for below. Honestly, I don't think Ring of Fire is particularly useful because you need to stay inside the ring to get its effects, and that's usually difficult to do. I think Immobilize is pretty much all around better than Spellbinder too, but Spellbinder is pretty strong and might work well for your playstyle. Basically, it disables your ability to use any spell in exchange for increased physical damage. So if you find that you just don't use spells very often and you mainly just use melee attacks, Spellbinder might be a great option for you. To cancel it, you either need to die or rest at a shrine, so you can't switch back and forth very easily. For alterations, we have 2. Cloud Step, which you can't miss in Chapter 1, and Rock Solid, which you can't miss in Chapter 2. Both of these are great options, but they facilitate very different playstyles. Cloud Step leaves leaves a decoy behind that enemies will attack so you can get a breather. The decoy does have health, so it won't last very long if it's getting pummeled, but while it's still around, you're invisible and can heal, take medicines, and even cast other spells. If you attack while your decoy is still alive, you'll do an Unveiling Strike, which deals some damage and typically staggers the enemy. I usually use Cloud Step as a way to get a quick break so I can safely take medicines in the middle of a long fight. I'll also sometimes use it as a panic button if I'm low on health and need a quick reset. Rock Solid, on the other hand, is your more aggressive alteration. In fact, Rock Solid is your parry mechanic. For full effectiveness, you want to time it like a parry too, hitting it right before an enemy is about to hit you. On the bottom of the spell selector, we have Strand abilities, and the only one you're going to get on your first playthrough is Pluck of the Many, which you've probably already seen creates a small army of clones. It uses a lot of mana, so you want to be mindful of how often you're using this, but if you unlock the upgrades, you can actually make the clones fairly strong, so Pluck of the Many can certainly be very useful, especially since the clones typically draw most of the enemy's attention. But of course, we also have transformation spells, and there's a total of 10 of these. We're not going to cover them all right now, but the first one you can get, which is also one of the best ones, is Red Tides, which you get by defeating Guangxi in Chapter 1. I think most people are pretty familiar with Red Tides and use it quite a bit, but I also think most players don't use it optimally. The best thing to do when using any transformation is to get in light attacks as fast as possible to build up a focus charge. Then, as soon as you get the charge, use the special attack to unleash a powerful blow. The focus gauge looks different while you're transformed, but it works the same way as normal. It's just that you can only get one charge, and that charge is indicated by the whole gauge glowing. But with Red Tides, you actually have 4 different variations of the special attack. It changes based on which direction you move while triggering it. I've found the best one is moving forward, which will trigger a vault up on the staff and slam down. You need to be relatively close to the enemy for this to land, so be careful not to trigger it too far away. The second best one, which is a bit better if you are far away, is to move backwards. You'll fly through the air like a fireball to hit the enemy. The sideways movement special attacks aren't great from what I've tested, so I wouldn't even bother with them. Keep in mind that even without any might upgrades in the skill tree, there's just enough time to get in 2 special attacks with Red Tides if you charge up focus quickly and avoid taking much damage. By the way, might is the gauge under your health bar while transformed, and it operates a lot like stamina, depleting as you take damage and do attacks. But it also slowly degrades over time, even if you do nothing. Now, don't confuse spell transformations with spirit transformations. Both types turn you into a different creature temporarily, but spirit transformations are much shorter and there are way more of them to choose from. 55 total from what I've seen, and I haven't even quite found them all yet. Spirits are also fueled by chi, not a timer recharge like spell transformations. Chi recharges from dealing damage similar to focus, but much more slowly. We're definitely not going to go through all the spirit transformations, but some of the best ones you'll come across early on are the Wandering White and Earth Wolf. Both deal a solid chunk of damage quickly, and the Wandering White also actually gives you a passive defense boost. The only problem with the Wandering White is you can easily miss your hit completely if the enemy moves away too quickly. That's why I like the Earth Wolf better. It charges forward to chase the enemy down, so you just have to be reasonably close and you're pretty much guaranteed a solid hit. Upgrading spirits through the cultivation tab at a shrine makes them quite a bit stronger, so it's definitely worth doing. The first few upgrades only cost Will and Blood of the Iron Bull, which you'll get plenty of as you play through the game. But I would hold off on upgrades that require Knots of Voidness. Those are much more rare, so you'll want to see which spirits you really like before using many of them. Don't forget that spirits also give a passive ability, and some of them actually also give a nerf, so make sure you're taking a look at those before using or investing in a spirit. Right next to the spirit icon, you also have a vessel icon. Vessels come from the secret bosses in each chapter, and there are 4 of them total. I feel the Wind Tamer and Weaver's Needle are the best ones. The Wind Tamer comes from chapter 2 and gives you a passive defense boost. When triggered, it gives you a much more significant defense boost, and the flash will also stun enemies, even interrupting some of the most powerful boss attacks. The Weaver's Needle comes from chapter 4 and passively boosts both your critical hit chance and damage stats, and when activated, basically jabs enemies relentlessly to deal easy damage. I think a lot of players also sleep on giving themselves extra protection and boosting damage with medicines. For example, I certainly didn't realize for a while that the elemental type medicines like body cooling powder for fire resistance and anti-miasma for poison resistance actually also reduce general damage from enemies that deal those sorts of effects. So body cooling powder isn't just for resistance against fire itself, but also against basically any attack from an enemy that's capable of fire attacks, even if the attack you're hit with doesn't involve fire. The elemental resistance medicines are more specialized though, so I generally stack a different set of 4 at the start of a boss fight to give myself a boost. We go over exactly which 4 those are in this video right here. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you over there in just a second.